Welcome to the Paul Adefarasin podcast. We revisit the word, surface the big ideas, and give you space to reflect, pray, and act. If you'd like the full message, though, you can watch it on YouTube or listen on Spotify after this episode.
Imagine for a second that you are sitting in this really vibrant, high-energy environment.
Like a massive auditorium or something.
Yeah, exactly. You're surrounded by thousands of people. The music is just swelling. You can practically feel the heat of the room. And, you're listening to a message that completely shatters the traditional religious narrative you might have heard about money.
Right. The usual stuff we hear.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You are not being told that wealth is some necessary evil. You're not being told it's like a worldly distraction that you should feel vaguely guilty about. You are being told that wealth is a strict, undeniable divine mandate.
It's a profound paradigm shift. I mean, this teaching takes the concept of money and forcefully elevates it from just a mere tool of daily survival to this critical spiritual instrument for global influence.
It really does.
It challenges you to view capital not as a luxury, but as an actual weapon for systemic change.
So welcome to today's deep dive. We are unpacking a truly fascinating piece of source material today. It's a transcript of a live-streamed Sunday service from House on the Rock Church in Lagos, Nigeria, dated August 9th, 2026.
Right, and the speaker is Pastor Paul Adefarasin.
Yes, and the sermon is part of a broader series. It's titled Winning Wisdom for Wealth Creation, Part 2.
And our mission for you today is to basically cut through the noise and extract the core message of this sermon. We're going to break down the key scriptural references used to support this, frankly, incredibly aggressive theological stance.
It is aggressive, yeah.
And crucially, we want to isolate the practical, actionable financial takeaways. The specific Monday morning habits and commitments he is challenging his congregation to adopt.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the central thesis of the sermon argues that before you can build any sort of generational wealth, you first have to aggressively demolish these inherited toxic mindsets about money.
Right, you have to clear the foundation.
Exactly. And to do this, the pastor points to a really fascinating historical claim regarding Pope Gregory back in the 12th century.
Oh, this part was wild.
Yeah. The argument is that the entire poverty is piety mindset, the idea that being poor somehow makes you closer to God, was practically invented as a bureaucratic loophole.
Yeah, so the context provided in the sermon is that the early Catholic Church was facing this massive corporate crisis, basically.
A corporate crisis in the 12th century.
Right, because think about it. If a priest were to marry and have a family, human nature dictates he'd want to protect and provide for them. Right?
Sure, you look out for your own.
He would naturally become focused on the material supplies his wife and household would need. And more importantly, church assets and land were actually being passed down to priests' children.
Wow. Okay, so it was a real loss of property for the church.
Exactly. So enforcing a vow of poverty and celibacy was functionally just an administrative wealth retention move. It was just to keep church assets in-house and keep priests completely focused on the institution.
So what started as like a 12th century corporate retention policy somehow morphed into this spiritual absolute over the years.
Yeah, the average person saw priests living in poverty and just assumed, well, God must want us to be poor too.
Right. But how does the sermon actually address the psychological damage of that centuries-old misunderstanding? Because unlearning that is tough.
Well, he leans heavily on Proverbs 23.7a, which says, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. And he uses this to explain the mechanics of self-sabotage.
Okay, so it's an internal thing.
Right. The core spiritual truth here is that poverty is rarely just an environmental issue. It is primarily an automatic mindset.
An automatic mindset.
Yeah, the sermon draws this really sharp distinction between your manual mind, which is, the conscious part of you that actively desires financial freedom, and your automatic mind, which is your subconscious programming.
That makes perfect sense when you look at cognitive dissonance. I mean, if your subconscious, your automatic mind secretly believes that wealth is inherently dirty or that rich people are fundamentally greedy, it is absolutely going to sabotage your success.
Oh, 100%.
Because your brain simply will not allow your identity to become something you morally despise.
Which is exactly why people suddenly blow a massive bonus or, subconsciously tank a major job interview.
Right.
If there is a war between your manual desires and your automatic beliefs, your automatic mind wins every single time just to protect your identity.
So you have to fix the belief first.
Therefore, the pastor explicitly states that working harder is just an exercise in total futility if your mindset remains broken. The very first step to wealth creation is re-engineering your subconscious to accept that divine abundance is the default and that God actively desires believers to hold wealth.
But wait, I have to stop you there and push back on behalf of anyone listening right now who grew up in, like, a traditional Sunday school.
Sure, go for it.
What about the most famous Bible verse regarding money? The one explicitly stating it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven.
Ah, yes, the camel and the needle.
Right. Isn't saying God wants you wealthy just some convenient modern revisionism by megachurch pastors looking to justify their own tax brackets? I mean, how does he possibly bypass that massive scriptural roadblock?
Well, what's fascinating here is how the pastor dismantles that exact objection by plunging right into the historical context of Matthew 19 and Mark 10.
Okay, how so?
He argues that reading that text through a modern literal lens completely distorts the actual theological lesson. He points out that the eye of the needle was not a literal sewing tool.
Wait, then what was it?
It was actually a literal narrow security gate built into the massive stone walls of ancient Jerusalem.
Oh, wow, a gate.
Yeah. So when merchants arrived late at night, long after the main wide city gates had been locked for security, they couldn't just walk their huge caravans in. They were forced to use this tiny pedestrian-sized gate.
That sounds logistically impossible for a camel.
Well, in order to physically fit a massive hulking camel through that tiny opening, the merchant had to strip the animal of all its cargo, all its silk, all its spices.
So they had to take everything off.
Everything. The camel literally had to crawl through on its knees, completely unburdened and vulnerable.
That paints an entirely different picture. I mean, it transforms the verse from a straight-up condemnation of the wealth itself into a lesson about vulnerability.
Exactly.
Because the merchants still own the goods, right? They just couldn't carry them through the gate.
Right. And furthermore, the sermon highlights the specific phrasing used in the Gospel of Mark. It says, how hard it is for them that trust in riches to enter into the kingdom of God.
Ah, trust in riches.
The historical reinterpretation proves the wealth isn't the evil component. Making an idol out of the wealth is the root of the destruction. You cannot trust your cargo more than you trust the city's protection. Money must always remain a servant and must never be elevated to a master.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because once we clear that psychological hurdle and accept that wealth isn't inherently evil, a massive question remains. Why exactly does God want believers to have it? What is the actual point?
Right, the grand purpose.
Yeah, and here the sermon transitions from personal mindset shifts to a staggering global mission.
This brings us to the central theological thesis of the entire deep dive. The pastor posits that wealth is absolutely not for personal consumption or luxury.
It's not about buying a yacht.
Not at all. It is an essential tool for building the kingdom of heaven on earth. To explain the mechanics of this, he references the biblical prophet Daniel, who interpreted a dream for King Nebuchadnezzar.
The statue dream. Yes.
The dream featured this giant statue representing successive worldly empires, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome.
And the climax of that dream is this stone cut without human hands falling from heaven. It just smashes the statue, obliterates those worldly empires, and then grows into a massive mountain that fills the entire earth.
Exactly. And in the context of this sermon, that growing mountain represents the kingdom of God subsuming all other worldly mountains.
Worldly mountains meaning what?
Well, he defines these mountains as the great pillars of society. So global nations, military powers, political systems, and most critically, massive financial systems.
To financial systems.
Right. The ultimate divine goal is for the mountain of the Lord's house to become the dominant operating system on earth.
And he refuses to leave this as just some ancient Babylonian metaphor. He brings this right into the 21st century and makes it deeply uncomfortable for the congregation.
He really does. He starts explicitly naming figures like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, and Aliko Dangote.
Not to condemn them, though.
No, not to condemn them, but to provoke the church. The logic is, if individuals outside the faith can leverage capital to build massive, system-shifting wealth, how much more should those who claim to have a divine mandate be doing exactly the same thing?
The sheer scale of that vision is meant to be shocking. The sermon doesn't suggest believers should, just aim to pay off their mortgages. It suggests they should be amassing the kind of wealth required to buy majority shares in global entities.
Yeah, he specifically challenges the congregation to imagine taking over SpaceX, redirecting its technological power to do, as he puts it, God's bidding.
Which is wild. If you are listening to this on your commute trying to figure out how to pay down your student loans, the idea of buying out Elon Musk probably sounds utterly absurd.
Oh, completely.
And just to be totally clear, we are not taking a side here or endorsing the politics of taking over global institutions. We're just reporting on what the source material says.
Yeah.
But we have to highlight the geopolitical weight of what is being taught here. I mean, the pastor even talks about buying into the IMF, the International Monetary Fund.
Right.
Why target something as massive as the IMF?
Because the IMF controls the levers of global debt. The pastor argues that institutions like the IMF often act as, well, neo-colonial slave masters to third world countries, trapping developing nations in endless cycles of debt.
So it's about changing the system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Taking over such an institution isn't about getting rich. It is about ending systemic oppression. He anchors this grand vision in Deuteronomy 8.18, which says, "Remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth."
The power to get wealth.
Right. The purpose of that power is institutional dominance. It is about transgenerational influence. Wealth is viewed as a baton in a relay race.
A relay race, I like that.
Yeah. You are supposed to run your leg, multiply the assets, and then pass that massive leverage down to your biological and spiritual children so they can continue shifting global systems.
Okay, a grand vision of combating neo-colonialism by buying the IMF is definitely inspiring, but it leaves a massive operational gap. How does a normal person in the congregation actually execute this on a Monday morning? We really have to bridge the gap from the theological why to the practical how.
Well, the sermon is incredibly pragmatic on this front. It lays out a specific blueprint for wealth creation. And the very first commitment sounds totally contradictory. He says you have to completely stop chasing money.
Wait, a sermon entirely dedicated to wealth creation is telling people not to chase money.
Exactly, because chasing money is treating the symptom, not the cause. Money is merely a metric of value exchanged.
Okay, so what do you chase?
The pastor's directive is to chase value, chase ideas, and relentlessly pursue competence. He states this fundamental economic law: money chases value.
Makes sense.
If you dedicate your time to developing your creativity and your capacity to solve complex problems for others, the financial compensation will naturally follow.
That brings us to the second, much harder practical step, which is practicing extreme, almost painful self-control through delayed consumption.
Oh, he is unyielding on this point. When you start generating income, you are forbidden from immediately buying liabilities.
And liabilities being things that instantly lose value the moment you purchase them.
Right. He specifically warns the congregation against blowing their initial hard-earned capital on luxury cars, designer shoes, or expensive bags just to look successful.
Okay, delayed gratification is great in theory, but when you actually start seeing real money, how much are you supposed to put away? Does he give like a baseline metric for the congregation to follow?
He does, and it's an aggressive one. He introduces what he calls the 10-60% rule. Depending on your current liquidity and survival needs, you must commit to taking between 10% and 60% of your gross income and putting it directly into wealth-producing assets or high-yield accounts.
Up to 60%. Wow.
And you don't touch the principal, and you do not spend the dividends.
Okay, let's visualize this because the sermon talks a lot about a holding company concept. Think of your initial capital like a single apple seed, right?
Okay, an apple seed.
If you plant that seed and finally grow an apple tree and it yields a basket of apples, the absolute worst thing you can do is bake a pie and eat the entire harvest.
Right, because then it's gone.
Exactly. If your goal is to build an orchard, which is essentially your massive holding company, you have to take those first apples, harvest the seeds inside them, and plant 10 more trees.
I love that analogy.
Thanks. You have to isolate the core asset and let your money have babies, as the pastor puts it, reinvesting every dividend until you have an entire ecosystem producing resources while you sleep.
That perfectly illustrates the mechanics of the holding company. The holding company shields the core assets while the dividends just compound. And to prove this isn't just, theoretical pulpit talk, the pastor shares a deeply personal, real-world anecdote about his own father's financial discipline.
I found this story fascinating because it really grounds the immense scale of the sermon in reality. His father wasn't some billionaire. He was a Lagos state judiciary worker.
Right, a normal guy.
But he managed to acquire a piece of land in Victoria Island, which is prime real estate in Nigeria. So how did he build on it? I mean, he must have taken out a massive, crippling loan to develop in that area.
Actually, no. He completely refused to take on personal debt. Instead, he utilized what the pastor calls strategic partnership and extreme delayed gratification.
Okay, how did that work?
He approached a major premier development firm, Kappa and Delberto, and offered them a deal. He provided the highly valuable land, and the developers provided the capital and construction to build 2 massive mansions.
But the developers aren't running a charity. What was the trade-off? I mean, they must have wanted something huge in return.
Oh, they did. The developers agreed to build the mansions in exchange for collecting 100% of the rent on those properties for the first 10 years.
100% of the rent.
Yep. It's essentially a build-operate-transfer model. They use that decade of rental income to recoup their massive building costs and take their profit. So for 10 long years, the pastor's father watched prime real estate that he owned generate fortunes, and he didn't see a single dime of it.
Talk about letting the orchard grow. I mean, giving up 10 years of cash flow requires an iron will. But the payoff mechanism at the end of that contract is where the generational wealth is really triggered, right?
Exactly. 10 years later, the contract expired. The developers walked away, and his father instantly owned 100% equity in 2 prime Victoria Island mansions, completely and utterly debt-free.
That is incredible.
And the massive passive income generated from those properties is what paid for the pastor's international schooling, sustained the family long after the father retired, and served as a textbook example of passing the financial baton to the next generation.
So what does this all mean for the person listening right now? Because taking these kinds of massive financial leaps, investing up to 60% of your income, locking up real estate for a decade, starting businesses, that involves massive inherent risk.
Very true.
And with risk comes crushing anxiety. If you are operating at this level, how do you sustain the journey without burning out or panicking the moment the market crashes or a deal falls through?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the sermon addresses this psychological hurdle by introducing a spiritual posture of rest and reframing.
Rest and reframing, okay.
Yeah. The pastor points to the book of John, chapter 10, verse 10, which he describes as the law of polarity. The verse says, "The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy, but Jesus came that they may have life and have it abundantly."
So wherever there is the illusion of scarcity, there must necessarily be abundance on the flip side of the coin.
Precisely. The sermon argues that scarcity is a manufactured illusion created by the thief to steal your focus and break your mindset.
So it's not real.
Right? Divine abundance is the fundamental reality. Therefore, a massive financial problem is never actually a roadblock. It is simply an opportunity in disguise waiting to be solved.
And he uses the historical account of Joseph in the book of Genesis to drive this home, which I thought was great.
Yeah, a classic example.
Joseph was thrown into a literal pit by his jealous brothers, sold into human trafficking, and then unjustly thrown into a dungeon in Egypt. But the sermon reframes that entire traumatic timeline. The pit and the prison were not his final destinations.
Not at all.
They were merely necessary, temporary passages that logically moved him to the palace, where he eventually became the second most powerful man in Egypt, controlling the global food supply during a severe famine.
And to survive those passages, the pastor insists on a strict behavioral change regarding your vocabulary. When you face a severe financial hurdle, you must immediately eliminate the phrase, "I can't," from your life.
Because saying, "I can't afford this" or "I can't fix this" literally shuts down the prefrontal cortex of your brain. It absolves you of responsibility.
Exactly. You must forcefully replace it with the question, "How can I?" The moment you ask, "How can I?" your brain is forced to boot up. It begins scanning for resources, strategies, and pathways.
It changes everything.
It does. It immediately shifts your identity from a helpless victim of scarcity to an active creator of value.
And that leads to my favorite, probably the most counterintuitive habit taught in the entire message, the spiritual discipline of going to sleep on your anxieties.
Oh, this is a stunning metaphor for trusting the divine process. The pastor lists several biblical examples where God executed his most profound, world-altering work while a human being was essentially unconscious or at rest.
Like who?
Well, when God performed the first surgery to create Eve, he didn't ask Adam to assist. He put Adam into a deep sleep.
Oh, right. And he also mentions the Apostle Peter. Peter was locked in a maximum security prison scheduled to be executed the very next morning.
Yeah.
Yet he was sleeping so soundly that an angel literally had to strike him on the throat to wake him up and facilitate the jailbreak.
The ultimate example provided, though, is Jesus on the cross, who committed his spirit to the Father and went to sleep in death before the ultimate victory of the resurrection.
Wow.
The takeaway is that God functions as the ultimate surgeon in your life. And any surgeon does their best, most precise work when the patient is fully anesthetized and at peace.
That's such a good point. If you are constantly thrashing around on the operating table in a sheer panic over your financial situation, you are actively getting in the surgeon's way. You have to rest in the promises so the operation can actually be completed.
This presents a really profound challenge to the congregation. Do you actually trust the grand vision enough to rest in the middle of a terrifying financial storm?
That's the real test.
Because if you truly believe that systemic wealth is your divine mandate for the sake of the kingdom, then panicking over a temporary market dip is functionally a form of unbelief.
Okay, let's bring all of this together. Think back to that vibrant, high-energy church environment we started with. The message delivered to those thousands of people was not just some gentle motivational speech. It was a total reconstruction of financial theology.
It really was. We've explored the aggressive demolition of the poverty as piety myth, revealing it as a historical administrative policy, not a divine law. We clarified the camel and the needle, proving that trusting in wealth is the danger, not the wealth itself. We examined the staggering vision of financing the kingdom of heaven to the point of displacing global institutions like the IMF.
We broke down the practical Monday morning mechanics, too. Stopping the fruitless chase for money, relentlessly pursuing value, executing extreme self-control, and utilizing the 10-60% rule to plant orchards of generational assets that compound over decades.
And finally, we discussed the psychological necessity of reframing anxiety, choosing to view severe problems as mere passages to the palace, and adopting the spiritual discipline of rest so the deep work of wealth creation can actually take root without self-sabotage.
It is an overwhelming amount of information to process, and it challenges deeply entrenched beliefs about the intersection of faith and capital, which leaves us with a final, lingering thought for you to carry into your day.
The source material insists, from beginning to end, that scarcity is merely an illusion designed to steal your focus away from the reality of divine abundance.
So if you were to rigorously audit your own life, your career trajectory, and your daily financial decisions today, how many of your choices are being actively driven by the quiet, panicked fear of losing what little you currently have? And how many of your choices are being driven by the audacious faith required to build a mountain that will outlast you?
It ultimately comes down to a single question. Are you spending your life managing a crisis, or are you building a kingdom?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the narratives you've inherited, keep looking for the hidden value in your challenges, and keep asking the big questions. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening. To go deeper, watch the full message on YouTube or listen to the full-length sermon on Spotify. Follow the podcast, and please share it with someone who needs it, and leave your response in the Q&A. Kindly keep your heart on fire, your eyes on Jesus, knowing you are the exception. Grace and peace. We love you deeply.